Chapter 13, Lieutenant, 1973. Soon after that, I moved to my new surroundings and began my new assignment as lieutenant on the lowest tier. There literally was no sunshine. It was dark with no lights at all. It was dingy with the stale odor of cigarette smoke, unwashed clothes, and sweaty bodies. As time went on, I was becoming accepted by the 10 NF members on the tier. I was trying to make other friends without letting on that I was still a little wet behind the ears as a leader. I had an outgoing personality which put others at ease. This would change because of some things happening that broke dark clouds of negativity to dampen my spirits. First, Babo had been transferred to Soledad, where Death Row Joe was housed. This happened because administration wanted to keep those two NF leaders together. I lost a good friend and mentor when that went down. The BGF hit a guard and killed him. This resulted in another prolonged lockdown investigation, which meant anyone standing in or near the vicinity of the incident, BGF, NF, MA, it didn't matter. We were rounded up and sent to the hole pending investigation. With the hole becoming more crowded with the influx of suspects from the latest incident, staff were making wholesale moves. That meant putting enemies of the NF on the tier. It wasn't a good idea and made a bad situation worse by tossing enemies into the mix. One thing did occur that happened to lift my spirits a bit was that my old friend Flapper showed up and was assigned to my cell during the roundup of suspects. Staff were doubling us up, tossing in an extra mattress to accommodate the increased population in the hole. Flapper was also glad to see me. We brought each other up to date from when we seen each other last 2 years before. Flapper was very informative and a big help to me in adjusting to my new position. Flapper was a hell of a guy. He didn't talk much, and when he did, he was very low-key and soft-spoken, never showing any emotion. He was also very experienced and loyal to the NF. I had never been a religious person, but when Flapper's familiar face showed up that day, I knew somebody up there was looking out for me. He was a big help in lowering my anxiety level. Going back to the BGF, they were active revolutionaries fighting repression forced upon them by the administration and society. I didn't know too much about them except what I'd heard from their leader, George Jackson, who I knew as Soledad. He was pretty much considered a legend. Everyone knew the BGF were sworn enemies of the Aryan Brotherhood, whose organization started back at Alcatraz prison in the 1940s. They used to be called the Bluebirds. Maybe that's why they changed their name. The BGF were allies with the NF, basically because they ran their organization a lot like we did, with ranks and chains of command. They got a lot of their training from a book called The Red Bible, which included the revolutionary history of China and how they commanded armies. Other books on Castro and Cuba were popular with them. Books about Marxism and communism, that kind of stuff. The current leader of the BGF was a guy named Mud. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy. When he spoke, he commanded undivided attention. I would get to know him very well. I was still conflicted about why the NF and MA had to keep their war going. It seemed counterproductive. We were all Mexicans. You had to fight with guys you used to be friends with or went to school with or went to church with. Mud told me that some wars are fought over the most trivial matters or misunderstandings, sometimes merely over an insult. War was war, he would say. My position as lieutenant was about to be put to the test. Word came down that a homosexual named Tina, who lived on my tier, was to be hit in retaliation for setting up an NF member for a hit. I had a lot of other tasks that had been handled with weapons, but this one was going to have to be done through the bars, and that was something new to me. Not being too experienced with this kind of operation, I sent the kite out to NF members looking for a volunteer. I thought I'd have guys lining up for this one, but the response was so quiet that you could have heard a tear mouse pushing a cotton ball. Not one person volunteered. I told Flapper about the situation, and I told him I planned to do it just myself. Problem solved. He reminded me that because of my rank as lieutenant, I don't make hits. That's what soldiers are for. Then he said he'd do it. This wasn't the first time Flapper had spoken up and wanted to do a hit. What I didn't know was that he was dying of psoriasis of the liver. Flapper died of that illness in 1978. We started formulating a plan to hit Tina the next morning. The day started out as usual, breakfast and a minor cleanup while waiting for the exercise period to open on the tier. At about 8:30 a.m., Tina came out and was walking around, not a care in the world. I called him to my cell and he approached with caution, wondering why I would be calling. I joked around and eased his mood like a spider to a fly, enticing him into the web. He let his guard down and approached. That's when Flapper came out with lightning speed, speared him in the side. Tina's eyes opened to the size of golf balls. He turned and ran, screaming, "I've been hit." I threw water to wash off the cell walls and tried to clean up the tear before staff arrived. Flapper broke the knife and flushed it down the toilet. Staff arrived and cuffed up Flapper and me as they searched our cells for evidence. The only thing they found was some diluted blood, mostly washed away by water. We were on lockdown for 2 days while they investigated. Tina never said who hit him or why. He was relocated to another tier in the hole with the group rejects calling themselves the Brown Bear Party, another wannabe gang. The Brown Bear Party, BBP. Isn't that like that fucking gay boy gangsters? Just like the fucking gay boy gangsters. After we were releasing from lockdown, Mud called me over to have a talk with me. He proceeded to school me about being a lieutenant in charge. He said that when an assignment is to be accomplished, you don't ask for volunteers. You command your soldiers to carry out your orders. He went on to say that joking and playing around with soldiers is forbidden. It shows weakness in those in command. He also told me I should be more serious with soldiers for their own good and protection. From that day on, I embraced change to keep my soldiers more focused. My mission was to keep them alive as long as they followed orders. A month after the investigation, no charges were filed for the hit on Tina, and Flapper was paroled. I was left to myself and thought about what he and Mud had told me. I sent a kite down the tier to inform everyone that from now on, nobody was to play games or joke around with me. If anyone needed to talk with me, it had to be about family business and family business only. 6 months later, myself, as well as the rest of the tier, seemed to have adjusted pretty well to the changes I'd initiated. The investigation into the hit on that guard had concluded, and with that, the population in the whole had been reduced. It was time for more changes. My time in rank and increasing experience had to be an advancement. I was now 3rd lieutenant. With the promotion came more responsibility. That also meant relocation. Before being relieved, I had to be recommended. Before being relieved, I had to recommend someone to take my place on the tier I was leaving. I didn't have the power to appoint, but I could suggest. I chose Slow Ed, an older, more experienced brother that came from Soledad North due to an adverse transfer. I felt confident in my suggestion, and the final stamp of approval came down from the captain, which was Larry. Larry was doing very well in his position. He kept the organization running smoothly. I was ordered to move to the 2nd tier on the opposite side of the building to reorganize the NF on that tier. I was basically starting a new regiment. I went into the first cell on the 2nd tier, as all NF lieutenants did. Sharky came with me. He was a valued asset, especially after Flapper's parole. The Nuestra Familia had key people in every job position throughout the prison. There were cooks, R&R workers, laundry, canteen, and hallway porters. Porters were basically NF escorts to provide protection from other gangs. Even though prison guards were always around, no chances were taken. All the watches had NF eyes and ears all the time. There were several NF members on the tier. Red Bone from Riverside County, Sharky and Charlie, all known as the CMC boys. Lil T-Bone from San Jose took care of business when needed. It was coming together.